HP 4th Champion PT3. Harry awoke at 5:30, slipped on a pair of shorts and his trainers, t-shirt, his sweatshirt, grabbed the Marauders map and his watch and headed out onto the grounds. He and his friends from Salem had started working out in their second year when they had noticed two things. Those who had really good stamina could last a really long time during a duel. Secondly, the boys that had good figures seemed to get the best girls. The boys had taken up running, and after that first year had started seeing the results. Girls were talking to them more. And they had performed extremely well in their end-of-year defense practical exams. Yet, none of them had been able to best their defense teacher, as they had all joked they might. Harry had asked Sirius about the best place for a good run while at Hogwarts, and his godfather had suggested a good few laps around the Quidditch pitch. Harry wasn't the only one up before dawn, it seemed. The gamekeeper, Hagrid, was busy in his garden while his enormous dog sat loyally at his side, watching Harry pass with interest. As he ran, Harry began to mull things over in his mind. Sirius and Remus had explained that he was likely going to be quite famous and get a lot of attention. Harry hadn't really understood until he'd walked into the Great Hall the previous evening. At his school, he was just another face in the crowd. Heck, he hadn't even been allowed to use his real name. Sirius had insisted that he go by James Black. Sirius explained that while they were very far away from England, wizards talked, and if Harry Potter suddenly showed up in America, things could become very difficult. Harry had tried to argue, believing he couldn't be the only Harry Potter in the world. As it turned out, he was somewhat mistaken. While not the only Harry Potter in the world, there were next to no other Harry James Potters in the magical world. Harry had never spoken the truth to any of his friends. And sometimes the guilt would rear up and he'd speak to Sirius, who always reminded him of the reasons for the secret. Sirius would empathize with his godson, but was always adamant that it was for his safety. He was still Harry Potter, the son of James and Lily Potter. So long as he remained true to himself, Sirius was sure Harry's friends would understand in the end. But all of his old worries had evaporated a few days ago. Harry's biggest worry was how he was going to ask out Stacy Littleton out for a date. And now he was trying to figure out how he was going to survive a tournament known for its death toll. Harry realized that he knew just about nothing about the Triwizard Tournament. He decided that he would go to the library at some point that afternoon and see if they had any books on the competition. He'd also ask Cedric what he knew, as they hadn't really discussed the tournament at great length the previous day. Maybe he'd try and find that girl Cedric had mentioned, Hermione Granger, and get her to help him. Thinking of Cedric made him think of the new people he'd met at dinner. The Hufflepuffs had been very friendly and welcoming. He'd actually liked Ernie and Justin, and thought they'd be cool to pal around with. Zacharias, on the other hand, while nice enough, did rub Harry wrong. Maybe it was his outburst when he'd ask Cedric for help, and that he was just being overly sensitive. Harry decided not to pass final judgment on Zacharias just yet. Then there were the girls. Sally Ann had all but avoided talking to him at all. Harry thought she might be a tad shy, as she didn't act like she was haughty or anything. Harry figured she might warm up to him if they hung out more. Hannah was very cute, Harry thought. He liked the way she laughed, but she laughed at nearly everything. Harry figured she was likely nervous, but she had been fun to flirt with. She had even started flirting back by the end of dinner. Susan was really sweet too. Harry loved her hair, and couldn't deny that her chest was quite nice looking. She had impressed him by becoming a bit playful at the end of dinner, bumping his shoulder when she'd made a rather enticing comment. So far he really liked what he saw of the Hogwarts girls. Of the ones he'd actually talked to, Susan and Hannah had emerged as his favorites, though Marietta was very high on his short list. She was just really good looking. He wondered if she went for younger guys. Harry smiled as he imagined Marietta grabbing the front of his shirt and slamming him against a wall and kissing him hard. He shook his head and reminded himself that Sirius was likely making up most of those stories he told about his time here at Hogwarts. He'd have to remember to ask Remus about some of those tales. When it was nearing 6:30, Harry began heading back to his room so he could shower and ready himself for breakfast. He remembered the two girls who'd promised to meet him for breakfast. He tried remembering their names, but couldn't think of them and would have to ask them politely to remind him when he saw them again. The blonde girl had given him pause. She appeared standoffish at best, and Harry felt like she was appraising him. More so than anyone else, at least. She clearly wasn't impressed by him, which Harry found intriguing. The auburn-haired girl had been very pretty, and Harry thought she might be cool. She reminded him a lot of a girl at his old school, though Harry hoped this girl wasn't as snobbish. Once he was all cleaned up, Harry dressed in the clothes he'd laid out for himself the night before and went to his new trunk to get his books ready. It was only as he was reaching for his new charms book that he realized he had no idea what classes he was taking that day. He closed his trunk and started for the door, when someone knocked. Harry smiled when he saw Professor McGonagall waiting for him. "Good morning, Mr. Potter. I have your schedule for you," she said, looking just as rigid as she had the day before. "I will see you in my Transfiguration class right after breakfast. Do you know where it is?" "Oh, yes, Professor." Harry smiled up at her. "I was shown the Transfiguration courtyard yesterday morning. And I'm sure I can get someone to show me the way if I get lost." "Be sure that you do. I will not tolerate tardiness," McGonagall said. She bade him good day and left Harry, who hurried back into his room to load his backpack with everything he needed for the day. Transfiguration, potions, and runes books, as well as his potion supplies and the Marauder's map, all got tucked away, and a few quills and an ink bottle. He then slung the bag over his shoulder and headed out to the Great Hall to meet the two girls. The closer he drew to the Great Hall, the more people he saw. A few of them nodded in his direction and one or two waved. Just as promised, the two girls were waiting for him just outside the Great Hall. "Good morning," he said with a smile. "Good morning to you," the blonde said, though she did not smile. She stood with her arms over her chest and ran her eyes over his attire. Thankfully she didn't roll her eyes or anything so condescending. Harry tried to catch her eye, but she seemed fascinated by something over his shoulder. The other girl, however, was smiling enough for the both of them. Her hair was done up pretty nicely today, and she also looked over Harry's attire, though she was clearly not appraising him. Actually, Harry had the impression she might be undressing him with her eyes, well, at least his chest, as that's where her eyes lingered. "Does your school not have uniforms?" she asked, taking in Harry's casual appearance. "Yeah, but I wasn't at school when Dumbledore came to get me. I was told that my school things are being sent," Harry said with a wry grin. "Shall we?" He allowed the girls to lead him into the hall, as he didn't know where they wanted to sit. They led him to the table furthest from the enormous fireplace. It was then that Harry noticed that everyone at this table had a silver and green emblem on the left breast, and their ties were all silver and green. He then saw that the next table over was the same one he'd sat at for dinner with the Hufflepuffs. "Can I ask you a question?" Harry asked, sitting down next to the auburn-haired girl and reaching for the pitcher of orange juice and filling his goblet. "Well, two actually. Not to be rude, but I can't remember your names." Tracy, the auburn-haired girl, smiled and then pointed to the blonde. "That's Daphne." "Okay, I think I'll remember now." "I'm so sorry." Harry smiled, but Tracy waved off his apology. "Don't worry about it. I imagine you'll be doing that a lot over the next week." "What was the other question?" Daphne asked as she buttered her toast and began to eat very delicately. Is there a rule that says you can't eat at other tables? Harry said, looking out on the great hall and seeing that people were all sitting according to houses. No one mixed. No, there's no rule. Tracy said. We just don't mix. Especially we Slytherins and the Gryffindors. Why? Harry asked, obviously confused. Both girls looked at each other for a moment before looking back at Harry, who was waiting expectantly. To be honest, I'm not really sure. Tracy admitted. I mean, we don't tend to get along with the Gryffindors. They think they're so much better than everyone else. Oh come on, they can't all be bad. Harry said, looking up and down the Gryffindor table. There's got to be a few cool people there, right? Tracy and Daphne were again silent, looking at the Gryffindor table. I mean, you can't honestly tell me that you like everyone in your house. Right? Harry added. Well, no. Tracy said. And to be perfectly honest, I have to say I never really gave it much thought. I mean, our houses have been rivals for so long. It's just like you just hate them on principle. Tracy shrugged, feeling her cheeks burn. Kind of stupid to hate people you haven't even tried to get to know. Would you both hate me if I was a Gryffindor, even if you knew nothing else about me? I take it there's no houses at Salem Academy. Daphne said flatly. Harry could see that she was not appreciative of Harry pointing out the stupidity of house division. No, we don't. Just boys and girls dorms. There's like 260 some odd students in my year alone. I share a room with 3 other boys in my year. So, we get a good chance to mingle and get to know one another without prejudices being put on us just because of what house we're sorted into. Again the girls were silent. And Harry was wondering if he'd just made his first enemies here at Hogwarts. So you'd just have us mixing with lesser witches and wizards, a boy said. Harry and the girls looked up to see a boy with silvery blonde hair that was very neatly slicked back. He had cold grey eyes and he was sneering at them. On either side sat what Harry was sure were 2 shaved gorillas. Harry Potter, Draco Malfoy. Tracy said, and Harry noticed that she sounded very sardonic. Harry remembered Cedric talk about Malfoy and his father. He couldn't remember a single nice thing Cedric might have said. As he took in Draco's condescending tone, and his very haughty expression, Harry felt that Draco had clearly earned his less than glowing reputation. What makes them lesser? Harry asked curiously. Well, their lack of blood. For one thing. Draco drawled. I'm pretty sure they all have blood. Harry said smartly, trying to hide his grin. He noticed Tracy smirk, and Daphne even cocked an eyebrow. That's not what I meant. Draco said quickly. This place is full of mudbloods and squibs. People, for lack of a better word, who should never be allowed to even touch a wand. Every year this place gets worse with more and more mudbloods being allowed to enter. And then they let that complete oaf, Hagrid, teach a class. I was mauled by a hippogriff last year because he has no clue what he's doing. They had to kill it. The moron tried to get it off, saying it was as gentle as a kitten. Well, my father made sure no one listened to that great prat's rambling. Why did the hippogriff attack you? Harry asked. How should I know? Draco said, looking self-important. A better question would be, why is that oaf bringing such a dangerous thing near students in the first place? See, the thing is, and I'm no expert, but a hippogriff only attacks if you insult it. So if you got attack, it stands to reason you gave it cause to attack you. Did Hagrid not tell you how to properly approach one? Oh no. Daphne said quickly before Draco could answer. He explained how you need to keep eye contact and bow in front of the creature and wait for it to bow in return. But Draco just flaunted forward because he's so far above everyone else. He just knew that the hippogriff would be so thrilled to be attended to by such a powerful being. He even complimented the beast by calling it. What was it again, Draco? A great ugly chicken. Tracy was losing her battle with restraint, and Harry saw her gripping the table tightly. He had bowed forward. Harry snickered and Draco's sharp grey eyes snapped to Harry's face. It sounds to me that you were attacked because you didn't listen to your teacher, Draco. Harry smiled. Maybe you actually earned the attack. Perhaps if you actually listened to your teachers and followed their directions, you wouldn't get hurt. You should watch yourself, Potter. You don't want to go and make enemies of your betters. Draco snapped. Draco, no one was talking to you in the first place, Tracy said irritably. Though she was still smiling from Daphne and Harry's combined verbal assault. Why don't you keep your pointed beak out of other people's conversations? No one is talking to you, Davis. Actually. Harry felt the need to point out. We were. Harry indicated himself and Daphne, who had cocked an eyebrow again. Draco glowered and turned back to his two friends, now ignoring Harry and the girls. I think he just made my earlier point, Harry said to the girls. Yeah. Tracy smiled, looking back at Harry. I guess we just went along with it all because that's all we knew. No one ever really questioned it before. It just seems like you'd be limiting yourself, and I don't see why anyone would want to do that. You could miss out on something really great, or a future job opportunity. You just never know what can happen or who might affect your life in some real way. You've made your point. And as Slytherins, we really shouldn't isolate ourselves, because, as you said, we might need some of these other people to accomplish our goals one day. Daphne nodded. Now, it's our turn to ask you a few questions. Tracy sat up a bit straighter, and Harry nodded his consent. Why were we all led to believe you had died that night? Where have you been? Daphne asked without preamble. Doesn't pull any punches, does she? Harry smirked at Tracy, who rolled her eyes. She doesn't know how to do subtle. Tracy smiled. Good to know. Harry remarked. Okay, well, I don't know everything. But I was told that there was a lot of worry that my life might be in danger from dark wizards looking for revenge. My godfather and I lived in lots of places. France, Spain, Switzerland, we even tried Japan for a bit. Really beautiful country. If you get a chance, go. I'd really like to go back one day. But we ended up in America when I started school. Why America? Tracy asked. There's schools in Japan, Bulgaria, France, China, I think Brazil and Canada have schools as well. My godfather thought it would be easiest. He said I hadn't stayed anywhere long enough to get a good handle on the language and that America would be easiest on me. I wanted to come here because I'd heard him talk about it so often, but, you know, threats on my life and all. Harry rolled his eyes and shrugged. What was your favorite place that you stayed? Tracy asked interestedly. To be honest, I've actually enjoyed America the most. Partly because I've been there the longest, but also because I gotten to experience so much it has to offer. Every break, Sirius takes me to do something really wild. Right before I got told about all this, we were on a hang gliding trip. It's amazing. Hang gliding? Daphne asked, her stoic mask falling away, and Harry saw real interest on her face. Yeah. It's the closest thing to being a bird I can imagine. Short of being an animagus, anyway. Harry grinned. You're just floating on the wind. I mean, being on a broom is great, and I love feeling the wind in my face as I'm playing Quidditch or racing, but this. I can't even describe it. I'm going to see if we can go again when this is all over. How is it done? Tracy asked. And Harry tried his best to explain the apparatus and how it was all about using the wind to keep you in the air. When Tracy asked what spells they used, her eyes nearly popped out of her head when Harry told her it was a Muggle sport. Wait. Tracy said, holding up her hands. Muggles do this. You were flying around on a kite without magic. You'd actually be surprised how many cool things Muggles have come up with. They sound completely mad, and to be honest, a few of them are. My godfather and I went bungee jumping. Jumping off a bridge with only a long cord strapped to your legs. Are you barking? Daphne asked, her bright blue eyes as big as saucers. What were you thinking? I wasn't. Harry smiled, laughing a little. Trust me when I say it's a really exhilarating. It's even more intense than skydiving. Sirius prefers that, but I liked bungee jumping more. I did it like 5 times that weekend. I think I've decided that you're mental. Tracy smirked. Completely barmy. Here I was thinking I was charming and debonair. Harry joked. Hardly. Daphne muttered. Breakfast was ending and the 3 rose from their table. Where are you off to first? Tracy asked. Transfiguration. Harry said at once. Oh, that's too bad. We've got charms. Tracy said. But we'll see you later, right? I'm sure of it. They said goodbye, and Harry pulled the Marauder's map from his bag and looked to see where the Transfiguration class was. Following the map, he made it to the classroom with no difficulty, and stowed the map after blanking it out. There was only a few students in the class so far, and the seats at the front were all empty. Save for one boy, who looked a little nervous. He had a round face and deep brown hair. He had his book open and was reading and looked to be mouthing the words. Excuse me. Harry smiled. The boy looked up and gave a bit of a start when he saw Harry. Would it be all right if I sat here? Neville looked at the open seat next to him and then back up at Harry, nodding slowly. Harry set his bag down and pulled out his own copy of the textbook. He looked over at the boy and offered his hand. I'm Harry. And Neville, the boy said. He clutched Harry's hand and turned back to his own book, though Harry could tell he was no longer reading. There you are, Neville. A girl said, sitting on Neville's other side. I didn't see you at breakfast. The girl had cinnamon brown eyes and a mass of wild curly hair. I went to the library. Neville said. I wanted to see if there was anything else I should add to my potions essay. Neville said. I told you I'd look it over for you. The girl said, sighing softly as she spoke. Hermione. I can't rely on you to do all my work. I have to do it myself or I won't learn anything at all. It's okay if you help me, but I need to stand on my own. Neville said, smiling at the girl. I don't want to be someone who uses other people to accomplish their goals like some Slytherin. Bit harsh, isn't it? Harry asked. Neville and the girl named Hermione turned to look at them. You wouldn't say that if you knew them. Neville replied. Well, I kind of do. I ate breakfast with Tracy and Daphne, and they were nice enough. Even got them to admit that not everyone outside of their house was all bad. I suppose they would have said whatever you'd like to hear. Hermione said loftily. They're all pretty cruel to Gryffindors, especially Neville and I. I'd be willing to bet good gold that if you were to sit down with a few of them, you might change your opinion. Hermione snorted and rolled her eyes. Neville on the other hand looked as if he were thinking Harry's words over. Harry. Mate. Harry turned to see a very tall red-headed boy with a long nose and a mass of freckles standing next to his chair, offering his hand. Ron Weasley. We've got an extra seat back there if you want to join us. That way you don't have to sit next to the know-it-all and the half-squib. Why do you have to always be so rude? Hermione asked angrily. Neville just sunk in his seat. No one's talking to you, Haystack. Ron looked back to Harry. Come on, you do want to hang out with the cool people, right? Harry looked at Ron, then back at Neville and Hermione. Neville looked as if he wanted to fade through the cracks in the floor, while Hermione looked mixed between wanting to cry and punch this Ron guy in the face. Well, I haven't been here all that long, so I'm not exactly sure who the cool people are yet, Harry said, turning back to Ron. Then he motioned his head towards Hermione and Neville and continued, but these two seem pretty cool to me. I mean, here we were just now talking about obnoxious braggarts, and here you are. Frankly, I thought it was a really good bit of magic. Harry heard Neville snort, and Hermione coughed. Ron's ears went scarlet and he stared at Harry, who simply smiled politely back at him. I have my own mind and I can figure out who's cool and who's not. And you haven't left me with a very good impression. Maybe you should figure out how not to be a jackass, and try again another day. Ron said nothing more, but scowled at Harry and walked away. Okay. That's two jerks I've met today. Harry sighed. Thank you. Hermione said. Harry looked over and waved her off. No, really. No one's ever stood up for either Neville or me, and you didn't have to. Thank you. I don't like bullies. Harry said flatly. My godfather always taught me that if you don't get along with someone, then you should just leave them be. Bullies just have to make other people feel bad because of their own inadequacies, instead of tearing other people down. They should be trying to better themselves. Harry scowled as he glanced over his shoulder where Ron was now talking with two other boys who were both looking at Harry strangely. He's going to make your life hell now. Hermione and I have been his verbal punching bags for years. Neville warned. I don't see that he could do much to me. I'm already entered in this stupid tournament. Harry shrugged. Hang on, are you Hermione Granger? Harry asked, turning to look at Hermione, whose eyes grew wide with surprise. Yeah. She said tentatively. Cedric told me about you yesterday. Said you were about the most brilliant witch in the school. Harry smiled. He said that. Yeah. I was actually going to try and find you later and ask for your help. See, I need to research the Triwizard Tournament, and he said that you knew the library better than anyone. So I was hoping you might be able to point me in the right direction. I'd be happy to help you. Hermione said, clearly in shock by what Harry had just said to her. Or that Cedric Diggory even knew her name. Before they could speak any more though, Professor McGonagall stepped into the class and called them to order. By the end of the lesson, Harry was really missing his old Transfiguration teacher, Professor Colton. She always started the class with a joke, usually one they'd all heard before, yet didn't care because she was always so funny. During class she would walk around and help you out, sort of like Professor McGonagall, but she could always make you smile. Even if you were still unable to perform whatever the assignment was. McGonagall just walked about watching her students attempting their spell work, and occasionally pointing out their mistakes, if they were serious. However, when she approached Neville, she shook her head sadly and remarked that he was seriously behind the rest of the class. Neville sank a bit more in his seat, looking quite dejected. Harry took pity on Neville, and as soon as McGonagall stepped away he turned to the boy. Forget what she said, Harry said softly as he flicked his wand at his hedgehog, turning it into a pincushion. Don't put too much pressure on yourself. Relax and just shut out everything else, and just picture the pincushion in your mind. Don't worry about getting the wand movement right. Just focus on the pincushion. Harry saw Hermione watching him out of the corner of her eye. Harry gave Neville a reassuring nod, and watched as Neville took a deep breath and closed his eyes for just a minute. When he opened his eyes, he pointed his wand at the hedgehog and said the incantation. Instantly the small animal transformed into a bright red pincushion. Neville's eyes went wide and he looked at Hermione and then Harry as he beheld his work. To check to make sure he'd done it correctly, he took one of the pins he'd been given and tentatively stuck it into the pincushion. Nothing happened. Neville's smile was so big that Harry was worried his face might split. I did it. I really did it. Little secret I learned. Harry said. Wand movements aren't really that important. It's all about your intent and focus. Whenever I have trouble learning a new spell, I break it down like that. Get rid of the wand movements and just concentrate on what I want the outcome to be. Thanks. Neville said, still smiling. I'll remember that from now on. The lesson ended and McGonagall asked that Harry stay behind for a moment. When all the students had left, McGonagall spoke, her voice much more relaxed and friendly than it had been since they'd met. That was a very nice thing you did for Mr. Longbottom, she said. Harry shrugged and McGonagall went on. I believe that he has it in him to be a very great wizard, but he lacks focus, which I believe stems from a severe lack of confidence. Save for Miss Granger, I do not believe he has many friends. Are you asking me to be his friend? Harry asked. McGonagall shook her head. It is up to you who you make friends with. I am simply asking that you try and continuing being supportive of him. I think you'll find that there are many who will look to you. I doubt you understand just what you represent to our country. I'm sure I'll find out. Harry remarked, already getting a picture of what he meant to people around here. Indeed. You best be off. McGonagall said, dismissing him. Harry headed down to the dungeons, using his map to guide him. He was really looking forward to potions. He loved the subject, and had always done well in the subject and looked forward to seeing how the Hogwarts class differed from Salem's. Harry arrived in the dungeon classroom and was greeted by Hannah and Susan, who saw him come through the door. They offered him a spot with them, and he smiled gratefully as he sat down. Just fair warning, Snape's pretty tough. Hannah whispered conspiratorially. Harry shrugged. Every school's got a tough teacher, I imagine. I doubt they're as nasty as Professor Snape. Susan said softly. The class door slammed and a thin man with a curtain of greasy black hair and very sallow skin strode to the front of the class, his black cloak billowing out behind him. He turned on his heel when he reached the front of the class. As most of you have no doubt realized, we have a new student in our midst. Snape spoke, his voice like oil, his black eyes cold, and staring hard at Harry, who simply looked back at his new teacher. The fourth champion. Snape stared a bit harder and Harry felt a chill run down his spine. He raised a questioning eyebrow, and Snape folded his arms over his chest. I think it prudent to find out if you are at least up to speed with my class before we proceed with today's lesson on antidotes. Tell me, Potter. Snape sneered as he said Harry's name. What is the essential ingredient in the draught of living death? Harry felt as if he were being put on the spot, though he had no idea why. He wondered if Snape did this to everyone at some point. Still, a teacher had asked him a question. I believe that's a trick question, sir. There are two essential ingredients. Asphodel and wormwood. Harry said. Snape's eyes narrowed and he stepped closer. Tell me then, Potter. Where would you look if I asked you to find celerine ash? Your local dragon handler, I imagine, as celerine ash is collected from the teeth of dragons, Sir Harry remarked, unsure of why he was being singled out like this. Harry guessed he was trying to establish the hierarchy of the class or something, which Harry thought was stupid. Since Snape was in fact the teacher of the class. Snape's face colored ever so slightly, and he turned away from Harry, his wand waving and instructions appearing on the blackboard. Harry thought that he looked upset that he hadn't made Harry look like an idiot with those two questions, but so far as Harry knew, those had been basic first-year knowledge questions. This led Harry to wonder exactly how far Hogwarts students were in their potion careers. We are continuing our work with basic antidotes today. I expect that you will all have your potions ready at the end of class. I will then choose someone to be a test subject. Get to work. He means whomever's potion looks the worst, Susan remarked, igniting her fire. Hannah nodded and looked a little nervous as she pulled out her potions kit. Harry looked appalled that a teacher might even think to subject a student to poisoning just to see if their work was suitable. It was barbaric, and irresponsible. What was worse was what it did to the students. Harry shared this class with the Hufflepuffs and the Ravenclaws. Harry noted that he hadn't met any students from that house yet save Cho and Marietta, but he remembered Cedric saying that they were the brainiest kids. Harry thought it pretty accurate just from observing their work in this class. They were studying the instructions Snape had written and also consulting their textbooks. They were pretty meticulous in the preparation, and Harry had to admire their work ethic. Harry was just slicing snake tongues when he felt a shadow behind him. He looked up and saw Snape standing over him, his upper lip curled. "I believe you have not read the instructions, Potter," he said coldly. Harry felt every set of eyes come up and rest on him and Snape. "I'm not sure I understand, Sir," Harry said politely, turning to look at his teacher, who folded his arms triumphantly. "Of course I read the instructions. Then why were you preparing to add sliced snake tongue when you clearly haven't yet added crushed dragonfly wing? Do you wish to blow up this school, Potter?" "Of course I haven't added my dragonfly wing yet. If you'll notice, sir, my potion hasn't yet started to bubble, nor has it begun turning green. Do not get smart with me, Potter. Why on earth would you be slicing you snake tongue if you weren't preparing to add it? Snake tongue has a very short shelf life once sliced, Potter. You're wasting your ingredients." Snape snapped, his voice raising in anger a bit. Harry stared at the man, completely gobsmacked by how petty he seemed. Sure, snake tongue had a shortened amount of freshness after it was sliced, but Harry knew that it was only a few minutes before his potion would be ready for it. Before he realized what was happening, Snape had waved his wand and Harry's potion had vanished. "You'll receive a 0 for today, Potter." "Hey!" Harry shouted in protest. But he was prevented from protesting further as the door to the classroom opened and a small boy with short brown hair and a red and gold tie peered in. "Professor Snape, sir." "What is it?" Snape bellowed and the boy jumped. Excuse me, sir, but I was asked to come fetch Harry Potter. He's wanted in the trophy room by Professor Dumbledore." "Very well then. Potter, get out of my sight," Snape said, turning away from Harry, leaving him stunned. Sirius had told a few stories about this man and how horribly they had treated him during their time at school. Harry always thought it was strange that he learned to avoid being a bully from one of the self-admitted biggest bullies ever. But now Harry felt he at least understood some of it. This is what could happen. Snape was a very bitter self-important man who got his thrills by doing to his students what had been done to him 20 years ago. Harry hefted his bag and with a quick nod of farewell to Susan and Hannah and followed the short boy to the trophy room. The boy's name, as Harry found out, was Nigel, and he was a second year in Gryffindor. Harry didn't hear too much more as he was still steaming over what had happened in Snape's class. Harry was sure he'd been on par to make one of his best potions yet. It might have helped that he'd made the very same thing a year before, but still. Snape hadn't even listened to him when he'd tried to explain his method. He'd simply vanished his potion and given him a 0. And here he is. Harry looked up and saw Professor Dumbledore, and then he was suddenly blinded by a dozen flashes. There were about 20 reporters all seated, and Harry saw that Dumbledore, Cedric and a few others whom Harry had yet to meet, stood on the opposite side of the trophy room in front of a very large glass case. "Please make room," Dumbledore said. And some of the reporters stepped aside as Harry passed, though the cameras kept flashing. Harry blinked his eyes, trying to gain his sight back. "Now that all our champions are together, we may commence with the wand-weighing ceremony. After which we will allow for a few questions of our 4 champions. Mr. Ollivander, if you please." Dumbledore motioned to a very tired-looking old man who stood from his seat and walked up next to the headmaster. Harry took this opportunity to glance at the other champions. Next to Cedric, who was standing in front of Dumbledore, was a very pretty girl with shimmering blonde hair and sharp blue eyes. She gave him an appraising look and then turned her nose up at him. Harry actually wanted to laugh. Apparently she felt she was quite superior to him. Harry loved people like that. They were fun to watch when they fell, which they always did. Behind the blonde was a very tall, imposing woman with her hair pulled into a very severe bun on top of her head. She wore a fine black silk dress, and Harry saw that every finger had a rather gaudy ring on it. Harry was reminded strongly of the Hogwarts gamekeeper, as he'd never seen anyone as large as this woman or Hagrid before in his life. On the other side of Cedric was a man with a very curly mustache and crooked yellowed teeth. He kept glancing at Harry and looked as if someone had coated his mustache with stink sap by the way his nose was wrinkled. He was watching as the last champion, a broad-shouldered boy with very closely cropped black hair, was watch Mr. Ollivander examine his wand. There was one more man there. He was practically bouncing on his heels as he watched the ceremony. Harry wondered if that man was from the Ministry, as they would be the ones responsible for putting this together. Over the course of the ceremony, Harry learned everyone's names as Dumbledore called them out. The broad-shouldered boy was named Victor Crumb, and he was from Durmstrang. The man with the curly mustache and the seemingly permanent look of disgust was the Durmstrang headmaster, Igor Karkaroff. The girl was Fleur Delacour of Beauxbaton, with her headmistress, Madame Maxime. And finally, the very cheerful-looking man, as Harry suspected, was from the Department of Magical Games, and was Ludo Bagman. Finally, Harry was asked to step up, so his wand could be examined. He handed his wand to the tired-looking man, whose eyes lit up with keen interest. Well, this is something," Mr. Ollivander said as he slid his long gnarled-looking fingers over Harry's wand. He kept turning it and waving it slowly around, getting a feel for the wand. "Is it a Johansson?" Ollivander asked. "No sir, I got it from a man named Pierce," Harry said proudly. "I've not heard of him. But this is a very fine wand. Flexible, yet hard. Willow, if I am not mistaken, but the core, I cannot identify it," Ollivander said, his brow knitting as he tried to figure out what lay at the heart of this particular wand. "It's Chair of Talon Sliver. One of the last ones, I was told." There was a sudden burst of murmuring from the reporters, and Harry turned a questioning expression to them, as if he thought they would explain their worry. "Are you serious?" Mr. Ollivander asked, looking at the wand more closely as if he might actually see the core. "Yeah." "Why?" "Why, Cheruphis were very powerful magical creatures. I'm sure you know their history," Ollivander asked, and Harry nodded. "Of course. They were reptilian humanoid creatures that feasted on young children, giving rise to the belief that they enjoyed female virgins. And that's why ancient tribes used to sacrifice young women and throw them into volcanoes, which ironically is where Cheruphis could usually be found. They were hunted to extinction for their hides, which were stronger than dragon's hide," Harry said, and he saw Dumbledore raise an eyebrow. Clearly impressed. They were exceptionally powerful creatures. They could lay waste to a village with one breath. I've never heard of a wand using any part of a cherub as its core. The maker of this wand must have been exceptionally gifted. Huh. Harry said, not sure what to make of the fuss. He remembered that he'd been very difficult to match and that the wand maker had been both ecstatic and sad that Harry matched so well with this wand. When Harry pressed the man, he explained that he was excited because he felt only a truly powerful witch or wizard would be able to wield it, and sad because he loved it very much. Being one of the first wands he'd ever created. I've never had any problems with it. Harry shrugged, accepting his wand back, and going back to stand alone. He suddenly wished that he had his headmistress here with him as he felt really stupid standing up there on his own. Dumbledore stepped forward and allowed the reporters to begin asking questions of the champions. As one, all the reporters looked at Harry and began shouting questions, while cameras began flashing again. One at a time, please. Dumbledore shouted. He then allowed one reporter to stand and ask her question. Mr. Potter, Samantha Gold, Witch Weekly. Hello. Harry said, feeling very nervous all of a sudden. The way the reporters were looking at him was like a pack of rabid dogs, and he'd just tied a stake to his head. How does it feel being back in your homeland? Samantha asked. Her quill poised to jot down his response. It hasn't really sunk in yet. Harry said, looking at the reporter who had curly red hair and lots of makeup. I've only been here 2 days. Are you making many friends? A man asked from the back. I've met a few people. And I'm looking forward to meeting more. Harry smiled. One at a time, please. Dumbledore said a bit more forcefully. Please wait your turn to ask your question. Xenophilius Lovegood, the Quibbler, said the next reporter. He was a thin man with shoulder-length blonde hair and a faraway look in his eye. Were you aided in your hiding all these years by utilizing Nargles? What? Harry asked, very confused by the question. Oh, sit down, Zeno. And let the real reporters do their jobs, said a woman with very long fingernails and jeweled spectacles. She had very curly blonde hair and blindingly bright green robes. She stood up and everyone got really quiet. Rita Skeeter, Mr. Potter. I think the question on all out minds is how you hope to compete in this tournament against wizards for older and more clever than you. Much less how your name got into the Goblet of Fire in the first place. Harry took an immediate disliking to this woman right away. The way she spoke to him, it was like he was 5. Harry didn't know how to respond to her, as he wasn't even sure she had asked a question. I mean, to announce to the world that you are in fact alive after all these years, and by doing so, completely overshadowing these 3 fine individuals is really making a statement, don't you think? I think that is enough. Dumbledore said, his gaze on Rita's rather innocent-looking facade. Harry realized what Dumbledore must have concluded as well. These people only cared about his sudden return rather than the tournament. Harry agreed with Dumbledore's decision to kick them out. There were 3 other champions up there, and they had all voluntarily submitted their names. Shouldn't all this hoopla be about them? Are you all right, Harry? Cedric had come over. Harry nodded and turned to look at the trophies behind him. I hope it isn't going to always be this crazy. I think it's likely to get worse. Cedric smiled. Listen, if you want, after dinner we could head up to the library and start looking up spells to prepare for this thing. Yeah. Harry nodded as something caught his eye. A plaque with 7 names on it. One name stood out to him and a smile broke out on his face. He had of course known his father was on the house Quidditch team from Sirius. But as he stared at the plaque he couldn't help feeling enthralled to be standing in the same castle where his mother and father had once walked. Well, Harry, how are you getting on? Professor Dumbledore asked, stepping up behind Harry. "Okay," Harry said, then he turned to the headmaster, his smile falling off his face at once. "Except for your potions, master." He accosted me for making my potion, trying to find some fault with it, and then without letting me explain my method, he vanished my potion and gave me a 0. Plus, do you know he subjects students to poison to test their antidotes? I have heard a great number of stories about Professor Snape over the years. I am sure he is not as bad as other students make him out to be. Dumbledore smiled. Maybe, but the fact still remains that he just vanished a perfectly good brewing without any cause, sir. He's a bully. And your students deserve better than that, Harry said, still steaming from his first encounter with the fabled Snape. I will have a word with him tonight at dinner. In the meantime, I believe lunch is now being served, and there are still afternoon classes to attend. Harry nodded and he and Cedric headed into the Great Hall for lunch. Harry joined his new Hufflepuff friends for lunch, and listened as they told him a few stories about the potions master. The more Harry heard, the more he disliked the man. Harry then astonished the group by telling them the potion they were struggling to brew under Snape's tutelage, he had learned last year, which was partly why he'd been slicing his snake tongue. He knew that his concoction was getting close to ready for it, just before Snape had ambushed it. Harry had heard of the man long before meeting him. Sirius had told him several stories about how he had tormented the man during their school days, usually ending the story with a discussion about how wrong it had been of him and how Sirius himself should have been more mature and tolerant. Harry had never truly understood what Sirius meant by it all until now. Perhaps if Harry's father and Sirius hadn't been so cruel to Snape, he may have been a different man. But then again, some people were just plain wicked. He's a git, Hannah said. Always has been. Unless you're a Slytherin. What do you mean? Harry asked. Snape's head of Slytherin House, and he favors his students. They get away with so much because of him, Susan explained. I've heard that he just loves to pick on Neville Longbottom. Last year he made Neville drink his own shrinking solution. Neville was in the hospital wing for a month. It's no wonder the Slytherins are such wonkers, Ernie groaned. With Snape as their head of house, they can get away with bloody murder around here. Have any of you ever tried talking to any of the Slytherins? Harry asked. None of his new friends responded in the positive, and Harry sighed. Doesn't it seem weird to any of you that you all hate them and you don't actually know any of them? Harry asked. They all stared at him for a moment. Even Cedric couldn't answer. You wouldn't be saying that if you'd been going here the last few years, Zacharias said. You don't know what they're like. Well, that's true, but the thing is I met a few of them today. I had breakfast with them, and they seemed okay to me, Harry said, much to the Hufflepuff's disbelief. That's where you were, Sally Ann said, looking up from her sandwich. Harry noticed that the brunette had very pretty eyes and a thin nose with very faint freckles. Sally Ann flushed when she saw him looking at her. Sorry. It's just that none of us could find you at breakfast, she said, lowering her gaze. And none of you even thought to look at the Slytherin table. Harry smirked. The shamed looks they had gave him his answer. Just seems stupid to me, he muttered. What did Dumbledore want with you? Susan asked, changing the slightly tense subject. Wand weighing ceremony, Cedric answered. The reporters only cared about Harry though. Forgot the rest of us were even there. That Fleur girl was glaring daggers at Harry the whole time. Was she? Harry asked, having not noticed. Cedric nodded. I thought for a moment that she was going to leap across the room and scratch your face off. Cedric grinned. Harry saw Hannah turn to glare at Fleur, who was sitting at the Ravenclaw table. He couldn't help thinking this was pretty damn adorable. "Harry?" Justin asked. "We were talking last night and we really want to see a broom race. We thought that if we could get some people together, we could have one on a weekend or something." "I'm in," Cedric's friend Curtis said at once. "I've got a brand new Comet 5000 that I was ready to use for the Quidditch season, but what with the tournament and all." "Count me in too." Cedric nodded. "Sure." Harry nodded. "Though we'll have to figure out a course, and without the rings. We might be able to get McGonagall and Flitwick to help us out with that," Ernie said. "All right then." Harry smiled. "We'll talk about it some more at dinner then." As lunch was over, Harry gathered his books and started off for his afternoon runes class. He was just about to head up the staircase when someone stepped in his path. She was a head shorter than he was, with very large blue eyes and waist-length wavy dirty blonde hair. She had very strange earrings that reminded Harry of radishes, and a necklace that had what looked to be butterbeer corks on it. Hi," he stammered. She was looking at him strangely. "Hello, Harry Potter," she said with a rather musical, dreamy voice. "Can I help you in any way?" Harry asked, not sure what to do. He felt like she was looking through him. She held his gaze better than he usually could, and he found it a little unnerving. He was just starting to wonder if this was how he made other people feel when he looked at them when she suddenly moved. Never in a million lifetimes would Harry have ever been able to guess what this girl had intended to do. She lunged at him, wrapping her arms around his neck and pressing her lips to his. Harry grabbed her waist to prevent her from falling over and dragging him down as well. Her lips were soft, and not at all unpleasant, and she smelled lightly of honeysuckle and berries. Harry was only just starting to respond to the kiss when the girl pulled away, staring at him with those wide blue eyes. Harry had kissed a grand total of 2 girls in his life, one of them just before his old school had let out for autumn break. He liked it very much and had thought of doing little else since the first kiss he'd ever had. Sirius always laughed and coughed hormones whenever the subject came up. The last girl he'd kissed was Stacy Littleton. Or rather, she had kissed him. But Harry had been steeling himself to make a move when she said goodbye and leaned towards him, giving him a very tender sweet peck on the corner of his mouth. It had been quick, but Harry felt there had been an unspoken promise that there would be more. But this was something he hadn't been prepared for or even thought about. Harry thought the girl was quite cute, if not a tiny bit strange looking. Harry couldn't help wondering if she had been holding back when she had kissed him, or if she had just realized what she had been doing and got embarrassed before things had gotten good. So. Harry started to say, but the girl cocked her head a little to the left and gave a soft, dreamy smile. "Frankly, I don't know what all the fuss is about." "I didn't feel anything out of the ordinary." She then turned around and skipped away, leaving Harry standing there with a very odd expression on his face. It took a couple of seconds before his brain fired up again and he had to run to his runes class. He had great difficulty in concentrating on his work as he kept wondering why the girl had kissed him. Even more disconcerting was that he didn't even know the girl's name. Still, it had been pretty damned cool. Harry ended up with loads more homework for runes than he'd ever gotten at Salem. This class was very far ahead of his old class and Professor Babbling was very knowledgeable, or at least she appeared to be. Harry hadn't been all that focused on listening, his mind constantly replaying the kiss. When class did finally end, Harry was stopped again, this time by a group of 6 girls, all wearing blue and bronze ties. "We just wanted a chance to say hello and welcome you to Hogwarts." The pretty Asian girl smiled, offering her hand. "My name is Sue, and this is Morag." She indicated the girl with strawberry blonde hair and freckles. Harry shook her hand as Sue motioned towards a heavy-set girl with acne. Eloise. Sue continued her introductions. Harry shook Eloise's hand and idly thought that she could easily crush him if he made her angry. That's Padma. Padma was a very pretty Indian girl with long straight silky-looking black hair and dark eyes that Harry thought he could look at for hours on end. She blushed slightly under Harry's gaze, and had to look away. This is Lisa. Lisa was the tallest of the girls, standing a head and a half over Harry. And last but surely not least, Mandy. Sue finished. Mandy smiled at Harry from behind the protection of her books, which she held tightly to her chest. She had shoulder-length wavy chestnut brown hair and bright brown eyes. Harry offered his hand and noticed how soft and petite her hand felt in his. "It's nice to meet you all," Harry said courteously. "We were wondering if you'd join us at dinner at the Ravenclaw table tonight," Lisa proposed. "I would be honored, but as it stands, I've agreed to meet some of my Hufflepuff friends." "You know you can have friends in any house," Eloise said, her voice a little gruff. "Funny." Harry smirked. "I said the same thing to a couple of Slytherin girls just this morning. I have every intention of meeting and befriending as many people as will be receptive. I just made plans before you asked me, and it would be rude to just not show up. But, I'd be happy to have breakfast with you tomorrow morning." "That would be fantastic," Lisa said before Eloise could open her big mouth and make Harry angry. "Let's meet just outside the Great Hall at 7:30 then. Is that okay?" "Perfect," Sue said, leading her friends in the opposite direction as Harry was heading. "We'll be looking forward for our chance to get to know you better, Mr. Potter." "It's just Harry." Harry smiled and gave a slight wave. They all headed off, Mandy in the rear, who gave a soft smile and a little wave to Harry, who smiled in return, making her turn away quickly. Harry was instantly drawn to her as she was the first girl not to blush like mad when he smiled at them. Harry turned and headed to his room, where he planned on starting his runes homework before dinner. "Where have you been?" Ginny asked as Hermione entered the Gryffindor common room after her last class. "I've been waiting for you for ages." Ginny's eyes were narrowed as she ran up to her best friend. She pulled Hermione towards the sofas where Neville and a few younger years were sitting and engaged in various activities. "Okay, your last class is much closer than mine. I was in arithmancy, and that's way on the other side of the castle. Secondly, why?" Hermione looked baffled. "How about the fact that you failed to mention at lunch that you not only spoke to Harry Potter, but you agreed to meet him in the library tonight?" Hermione's eyes shot to Neville, who buried his face very deep into his book, hoping to escape the bushy-haired girl's wrath. Clearly Neville had told Ginny all about what had happened in Transfiguration that morning. "It's no big deal, he just wants help researching the Triwizard Tournament. Cedric told him I might be helpful." "Hold on a second," Ron Weasley said from his seat where he'd started a game of chess with Seamus Finnegan. "Cedric Diggory told Harry Potter about you. How does he even know your name? It's not like you're special or even good looking. I mean, he's dating Cho Chang after all. Why would he ever be interested in you?" "Not that it's any of you business," Hermione glowered. "But he suggested to Harry that I'm very smart, and I might be helpful. And here I was thinking Potter might be cool or something. Obviously we were all mistaken. Apparently he's a huge loser. Why else would he want to hang out with the likes of you? Maybe he likes the smell of musty old books." Seamus Finnegan chuckled, and Dean Thomas grinned as well. "Maybe Cedric and Harry feel sorry for you," Ron suggested. "I mean, everyone thinks you're pathetic. I sometimes wonder why." "Ron," Ginny said, her voice low and menacing. I'm only going to say this one final time. Leave Hermione and Neville alone. You're acting no better than Draco Malfoy. Ron's face went pink and he glared back at his sister. Why do you defend her? She's only dragging you down. No one likes her. I like her. Ginny shouted. I've gotten more out of being friends with her and Neville than being related to you. Now I understand why the twins won't admit you're their brother. That's slander. Fred said from across the room, while his twin nodded. There's absolutely no proof that we are in fact related to that git. George added. Shut it. Ron snapped and the twins began laughing. I think you owe it to yourself to get a better class of friend than this lot. Ron said, and turning away from them as if he'd just won the argument. Ginny snarled and turned back to Hermione, dragging her to the girls' dorms. When they reached Hermione's bed, Ginny leapt up onto it and folded her legs under her. Hermione recognized it was time for some girl talk, and sighed in resignation. She wasn't really the giggly gossipy type, nor was Ginny, to be honest, yet, every so often, Ginny would break down and embrace her teenage femininity, no matter how appalling it might be. It wouldn't be all bad, except she always made Hermione do it as well. Sometimes it wasn't so bad. In fact, they had gone dress shopping last summer when Ginny had stayed with Hermione. It had been fun to try on dresses and high heels and attempt to get dolled up. Hermione had even enjoyed walking around the mall a bit. She even saw a couple of boys looking at her longingly, though she felt it was more likely they were drooling over Ginny. But girl talk always annoyed her. She never understood how her roommates Parvati and Lavender could waste hours talking about boys. I want to know everything. Ginny smiled. There's nothing really to tell. Hermione shrugged. When he heard my name, he told me that Cedric had told him I was very smart and that I could help him in the library. He said he was thinking of trying to find me to ask me to help him. Honestly, I was more stunned to learn that Cedric even knew who I was. We didn't get to talk anymore because class started. Oh, you are so lucky. Ginny sighed. You get to be alone with him and you can come, you know. I'm sure he wouldn't mind. Hermione said, taking off her robe and opening her trunk to get a book. And be the third wheel? No thanks. Besides, studying in the library doesn't sound like fun. We spend way too much time in there as it is. Ginny said. I don't know why you're making such a big deal out of this. He's no different from any other boy in this school. Hermione huffed. Hermione, did your dad ever tell you bedtime stories? Ginny asked. Something in her tone made Hermione pause. Sure. She shrugged. As a little girl, did you ever imagine yourself as the princess waiting for the brave knight to rescue you, or something like that? Ginny continued. I guess. Hermione said, sitting down on her bed, listening to her friend. Well, okay. Imagine hearing your father tell you about a brave knight who vanquished the most evil wizard ever known. A knight so brave that he simply can't be rivaled. Got it? Ginny said imploringly. Hermione nodded, encouraging Ginny to go on. Now imagine that not only, at 5 years old, you find out that not only is the story you've heard so often true, but that hero is real. And to top it off, if he were alive, as many believed, he's right around your age. That's what I grew up with. That's what so many of us grew up with. If you were half or pure blood, you knew the story of Harry Potter. We were all told he was dead, but a lot of people didn't believe it. My dad always said he thought Harry was hidden because no body was ever found. Some people argued that he was small enough to have been just. Ginny shuddered and Hermione understood the unfinished thought. Now we find that he's alive, and not only that, but he is just a normal average teenager. Not only is he not some fantastical hero with magic just pouring off of him, but he's normal. An everyday run-of-the-mill, although very good-looking, wizard. We all grew up to believe him to be this image of perfection, only to find out the reality is so much better. Okay. Hermione smiled, finally feeling that she understood all the girls in the castle better. But how do you expect anything to happen if you don't talk to him? Well, see, that's what I have you for. Ginny smiled and Hermione shivered involuntarily. She realized too late that Ginny had a plan, and she, Hermione, had just become a very integral part. Harry ran into Ernie and Justin, who was holding hands with Sally Ann as they were entering the Great Hall for dinner. They joined the other Hufflepuffs and Harry met Megan Jones, Wayne Hopkins, and Stephen Cornfoot, 3 other fourth years who he had not yet spoken with, though he recognized them from his disastrous potions class. They joined Zacharias, Hannah, and Susan at the Hufflepuff table. Harry sat between Hannah and Susan. He was growing quite fond of the 2 girls, and wondered idly if either of them had boyfriends. If not, he might try to ask them out after he got to know them a bit better. "How was runes?" Hannah asked as they all began to fill their plates. "It was good. It's going to be tough though. I'm really behind in that class. I've got loads of homework already. It's crazy. My old school seems to be ahead of you in potions, but like 2 years behind on runes. Maybe different schools put emphasis on different subjects," Susan said wisely. "Well, on top of that, I was having difficulty concentrating. This girl kissed me as I was going to class." Several forks clattered loudly on the golden plates. Harry looked up suddenly, feeling frightened by the looks on Hannah, Susan, and Megan's faces. Zacharias looked as if Christmas was about to come early, while the other boys clearly looked as if they wanted to make a hasty retreat. "Who was it?" Megan asked, her dark eyes flashing. Harry shrugged, which only made the girls look more intimidating. He had no idea why they were all being so protective of him. He wasn't dating any of them, unless in the last 24 hours he had pledged himself to them in some manner he was not aware of. He then wondered if asking out Hannah or Susan was actually a good idea anymore. "I never even got her name," Harry said. "She just kissed me, said she didn't see what all the fuss was about, and skipped away." "Skipped?" Susan asked for clarification. She stared at Harry for a moment as he nodded. "Did she had blonde hair?" Hannah asked. Yes to both questions," Harry said warily. The tension at the table melted at once, and the girls all calmed down. "Of course it was Looney," Hannah said as if that explained everything. Who?" "Luna Lovegood," Sally Ann said. "She's in Ravenclaw. She's what's a nice way to put it?" "Weird," Ernie said quickly. "Nice enough, but she says the oddest things, you know." "Yeah," Zachariah said with a nod. "She talks about the strangest things as if they really exist. Her father is editor of the Quibbler." "Wait, the Quibbler?" Harry asked. "I think I met him today. He asked if I used Nargits, or Gnarlies or something to keep hidden. It was weird. Like father like daughter," Ernie said, reaching for more pork chops. "So is she a good kisser?" Megan punched Ernie on the arm, making him shout indignantly. "What?" he asked, rubbing his arm. "Rude much?" Megan asked, her expression cold. "To be honest, I was too surprised to really analyze her technique, or whatever." Harry smirked. "I've never had anyone just up and kiss me for no reason. But, I think it could have been nice had I been prepared for it. Harry noticed Hannah looking thoughtfully, and a glance at Susan showed that the redhead was also looking contemplative. He wondered if he had just told them how he liked to be kissed, and a coy smile emerged on his face. He was really starting to like Hogwarts. Harry decided it was time that he learned a little more about his new friends, and began asking basic questions. He enjoyed hearing stories about everyone's first bits of accidental magic, especially Susan's. Apparently when the redhead was around 5, she had gotten really angry at her aunt, who had told her she could not have any biscuits before dinner, and had even locked them away in a cupboard so Susan could not get to them. Harry was nearly falling off his seat when Susan explained that her aunt heard a great crash where the door had been ripped off its hinges, and found her niece with the cookie jar in the sitting room, 3 cookies in each hand, and a satisfied smile on her little face. Just out of curiosity, what kind of cookies were they? Harry asked between gasps for breath. Chocolate chip, of course. Susan grinned, and Harry made a mental note not to get in between the redhead and her favorite cookies. What was your first bit of accidental magic? Hannah asked. Sirius said it was summoning the cat when I was 1 or so. Really? Ernie asked. I've never heard of anyone showing signs that early. Harry only shrugged. Apparently my parents were surprised as well, and I don't think the cat liked it too much either. Harry stood and pulled up his shirt a little to show 3 very faint lines on his hip. Hannah and Susan, who were closest, sucked in their breath as they caught sight of his skin under his shirt. Harry was very thin, and his clothes were rather loose-fitting, but now they could clearly see that this boy had some nice definition. This tease only made each girl who could see Harry want more. Sirius said I was lucky my mom got there quickly, or it could have been a lot worse. Harry smiled as he dropped his shirt and sat back down. Excuse me. Harry turned and found Hermione Granger standing behind him, looking a bit embarrassed. I'm so sorry to interrupt, but you had asked me to help you in the library, and I didn't know if you knew the way. Thank you. Harry smiled, standing up. Hermione saw that Susan Bones and Hannah Abbott were giving her surreptitious looks of bitterness as Harry rose from his seat. I'll see you lot later. Harry smiled, giving a wave to his new friends before turning to follow Hermione. They don't like me, Hermione said softly as they got out of earshot. What did you do to make them not like you? Harry wondered. Hermione shrugged. The same thing I did to everyone else, I guess. I just exist. Harry gave her a curious look and then shook his head. You people presume a lot. Everyone hates everyone else for no reason. It's so damned stupid, you know. Can't change the way people think. Hermione shrugged. That's garbage. Harry countered. You can't change the way people think if you don't try. Tell you what. Let's try an experiment. Hermione nearly tripped as she turned to look at Harry skeptically. Tomorrow, I'm having breakfast with the Ravenclaws. Why don't you join me? They'll get mad and tell me to go away. Hermione said, her voice catching. Then I'll go away with you. Harry said flatly. They can either tolerate you and maybe even get to know you, or they can not be my friends. Are we friends? Hermione asked, looking into Harry's green eyes, and he smiled. Don't know yet. He said honestly. I don't know you yet, and you don't know me. But, we're going to spend some time together and then we'll decide. At the very least, we'll actually have our opinions of each other based on time we've spent together instead of just presuming we wouldn't get along. Sound all right? Hermione could only nod, and Harry smiled, motioning for her to continue leading them to the library. Hermione had never ever imagined that she could met someone her own age that made so much sense. She was really starting to understand why the other girls were so fascinated by him. Yes, Harry Potter was good looking. There was simply no denying it. With those amazing green eyes and that messy hair and that smile that just made a girl swoon. But more than that, Harry was rather intelligent, and he wasn't some prejudiced blowhard. He had a very strong set of values, from what Hermione had discovered. It was hard not to like this boy. Once they got to the library, Hermione helped Harry find a few books that were about the Triwizard Tournament. And they sat down together at a table and Harry told Hermione that what he was really looking for was some clue as to what the tasks might be. Hermione found it truly refreshing that Harry, unlike other boys she knew, seemed to take his studies fairly seriously. Yet, as they combed through tome after tome, he would engage her in light conversation. Hermione had real difficulty in concentrating with Harry there with her. It wasn't that his queries were distracting, more the fact that he seemed truly interested in her as a person. No one other than Ginny or Neville had really shown any motivation to get to know her at all, and usually anyone who spoke to her was just doing so to remind her that they didn't care for her. As if she needed the reminder. As they continued to voraciously search out facts and clues about the tournament, they discovered that the tasks were all made to test certain aspects of a witch or wizard. Typically the first test was designed to test a wizard's bravery, and they were not usually given any clues as to what the task might be. The second task usually targeted the champion's reasoning and resourcefulness. Hermione read an excerpt from Eternal Glory that said champions were given bits of parchment with riddles written in ancient runes that actually told them what they would be facing. Once translated, the champions then had to figure out what they would need in order to get past the challenge, which turned out to be passing through the Great Pharaoh's crypt and retrieving stone tablets. Which turned out to have clues for the final task. "You don't think they'll apparate us to Egypt, do you?" Harry asked. Hermione shrugged as she turned a page. "I don't think so. This seems to be such a big deal, I think it more likely that whatever the challenges are, they'll bring them here," she said thoughtfully. "Well, that's good. I'll just keep an eye out for anyone building a pyramid then," Harry said. Hermione laughed in spite of herself and Harry chuckled a bit as well. "You know, what you did for Neville this morning," Hermione said when she'd stopped laughing. "That was really nice. I've tried helping him, but maybe I just over-explain it, I guess. He always seems more confused, and then has a worse time trying to manage." McGonagall said he's got a real lack of confidence. Harry said, looking up from terrors of the Triwizard Tournament. "His grandmother is kind of strict and she holds him to an impossible standard." Hermione sighed. "What about his parents?" Hermione shook her head and looked at Harry. "He doesn't talk about them. I don't know for sure, and I haven't been able to find out what happened to them. I don't think they're dead, but I know he doesn't live with them. He always just clams up whenever someone bring them up." "I can relate." Harry sighed, closing the book. "I'm sorry," Hermione said quickly, fearing she'd just put her foot in it. "It's all right." Harry waved it off. "I can't remember them, though I wish I could. Sirius is great, but there's sometimes when you just really need your mom and dad, and nothing can substitute for it, you know." Hermione nodded, a bit of sadness in her eyes. "Have you found anything on the third task?" "Only that it is usually quite brutal," Hermione said, looking back to her book. "None of these books have anything specific, save for it's usually made to be very tough. It's usually the task that champions die attempting to complete. The tournament in 1223 went on for 5 days before a champion emerged, and he died 3 days later. It doesn't say what killed him though." "Reassuring," Harry muttered. How can I even begin readying for this thing if I have no idea what I'm going to face? Maybe you're going about this all wrong, Hermione said, and Harry turned to look at the bushy-haired girl, thinking that despite her out-of-control hair, she was quite pretty. Maybe what you need to do is concentrate on learning some really good spells. Stuff that would be useful in a lot of different situations, she said, rising from her chair and hurrying into the stacks before Harry had a moment to question her. In a flash she was back, arms loaded with thick tomes which she dropped onto the table with a very loud thud. Wow! Was all Harry could think to say as Hermione handed him the first book. So, what we should do is make a list of any spells that could be useful to you in a fight. Or if you have to get out of some kind of trap or anything like that. She smiled, taking out some parchment and a quill and setting to work making a list of jinxes, charms, hexes and anything else she found interesting. Hermione's list was nearly 2 feet long by the time Cedric found them. His eyebrows rose into his hairline when he saw her tiny scrawl in neat lines that would be easy to read under a really strong magnifying glass. So I see you started without me. He grinned, making Hermione look up and blush a bit under Cedric's gaze. Hermione thought that by learning a bunch of useful spells, I might be better off than trying to figure out what the tasks might be, Harry said, closing his third book. Not even sure what he was looking for. I told you she was brilliant. Cedric smiled. How many spells do you have there? Hermione felt her face flush and replied 75, but I've been copying all the wand movements and incantations. He doesn't have to find the books again. Well, I hate to break this up, but I thought you would like to start getting in some practice, Cedric said. Harry nodded and rose from his seat. I'll put the books away. Hermione smiled, handing the parchment to Harry, who thanked her profusely. Remember breakfast. 7:30 right outside the Great Hall, all right. He smiled. Hermione nodded and bade the two boys headed off. I'm impressed, Cedric said as they left the library. So far you've made friends with people in every house. Well, not friends yet, but I've met a lot of people. I hope to make friends. Any girls catch your eye? Cedric smiled, thinking it funny that Harry's cheeks pink and or your lips. Oi, Harry said, smacking his face with his palm. Does everyone know about that? Not yet, but they will by morning. Cedric smirked. Hogwarts rumor mill is incredibly fast. To be honest, I don't envy Luna Lovegood. She's going to have a lot of girls hounding her for details, or worse, she's going to get hexed more than usual. What do you mean? Harry asked, feeling he wasn't going to like what he was about to hear. Well, like you heard, she's rather different. Cho told me that she's the butt of a lot of jokes and pranks. Last year she had all her books stolen from her. The thing is, she never told any of the teachers. She just kept going to class without her books and getting in trouble because she said that her books were taken by some creature she'd made up. Funny thing is, one friend, Ginny Weasley, got fed up with it, and went to the Ravenclaw prefects and told them they'd better get her books back or start a collection for replacements. Or she'd go to Dumbledore. The next day, Luna had all her books back. I like the sound of this, Ginny. Harry smiled. She's like a damned phoenix on a broom. She very nearly stole the snitch from me last year in our final game, Cedric said admiringly as he opened a classroom door and allowed Harry to enter, closing the door behind him. Right, so I'm going to show you a few spells that you'd normally learn in 6th year. While Cedric was teaching Harry some rather interesting spells, Luna found herself in front of 12 girls from her house, who had followed her into the 3rd-year girls' dorm. She had barely sat on her bed where she had intended on writing a letter to her father when they had come marching in. Is it true? Asked Annette Hadalburn, an sixth-year girl who was staring at Luna as if she were something disgusting. I'm sorry. Luna looked up curiously, which was saying something. However, Luna knew exactly what these girls wanted of her. She had heard someone in the common room mention her name along with Harry Potter's. Judging from some of the glares she was getting at the moment, there was no question in Luna's mind she was about to be hexed into next month. Luna wondered idly if it would be very painful. Is it true what they're saying? Marietta Edgecombe asked, stepping in front of Annette and giving the older girl a hard look. Did you really kiss Harry Potter, Luna? Yes. Luna said simply, looking at each girl in turn. I wished to know what all the excitement was about. I've heard nearly every girl talk about snogging him, and wanted to know why. I still don't know what is so fascinating about it. Perhaps I did it wrong. I can't believe it. Lisa Turpin shouted, throwing her hands up in the air in frustration. Of all the girls in the school, he kisses her first. Did you use a love spell? Another girl asked. When did it happen? Someone else shouted. Luna, would you tell us all about it? Cho Chang asked sweetly. Luna gave a very faint smile and nodded. She had never had so many people interested in talking to her. Usually they said things about her as she walked by thinking they couldn't hear them. It was a very peculiar change and Luna was far too curious as to what might happen to deny them a story. I simply kissed him in the corridor after lunch. She smiled dreamily. That was it? Then I went to Charm's class. Wait a minute. Sully said, stepping forward. You just kissed him? Had you talked to him before that? I said hello. Luna said without emotion. Then I kissed him. Did he start tilting his head towards you like he wanted to kiss you? Morag McDougal asked, looking rather confused. No. In fact, I think he was a bit confused. I didn't even introduce myself. It was a bit rude of me actually. Okay. Eloise Midgen said from the back. The girls got real guts. Who else would have thought to just grab him and snog him? Without even introducing themselves first before just locking lips. Snog him? Luna asked, her eyebrows going up. Perhaps that's what I did wrong. I only kissed him on his very soft lips. I didn't even think to use my tongue. Soft lips. Padma Patil whined. She clutched her hands to her chest and her eyes were far away. Did he hold you tightly? Or run his fingers through your hair as you kissed? Luna shook her head slowly. He only lightly held my waist to keep me from falling. I was rather forceful. Perhaps that's why I didn't feel anything special. I did do it all wrong, didn't I? Maybe I should have let him kiss me. Maybe he prefers initiating something so intimate. The Ravenclaw's girls gave her looks of contempt, wonder and jealousy. Luna knew exactly what they were all thinking. They all wanted to kiss Harry Potter. It actually disgusted Luna that none of them even cared about him. All they seemed to want were the bragging rights that they had snogged the boy of legend. So does that mean you're shot of him then? Lisa Turpin asked, looking a bit hopeful. I don't know. Luna said honestly. I think he would be a very nice friend to have. But you don't want to date him? Padma asked, trying to clarify the inquiry. As Luna was so bizarre, there was no telling if she understood what they were asking. Oh, I don't think he would like me in that way. I think he wants to date Susan Bones or Hannah Abbott. He looks at them a lot when he speaks to them. I think they fancy him as well. They whisper behind their hands and giggle a lot. I've also seen Harry looking at Susan Bones' chest when she thinks she isn't watching him, yet she puffs out her chest, and she left the top button undone after lunch. My breasts aren't nearly as large as hers. Are you saying he's a boob man? Sully asked, awkwardly glancing at her own chest. Mentally comparing herself with Susan Bones. Aren't they all? Eloise asked, and a few girls laughed. Slowly they began to move out of the dorm, leaving Luna alone again. The wide-eyed blonde had to wonder if she had just set to motion something that would be extremely entertaining to watch. She had an image of poor Harry being inundated by girls with the top buttons undone so he could get good looks at their cleavage. Luna was positive that thanks to all she had just shared, she would be able to capture a rackspurt now. Have you heard? Pansy Parkinson sniggered as she entered the Slytherin fourth-year girls' dormitory. Millicent Bulstrode lumbered in behind her and going to her trunk and looking a bit sleepy. Both Daphne and Tracy, who were already dressed in the bedclothes, looked up from their conversation to look at Pansy, who was smiling like the cat that got the canary. What are you on about? Tracy looked annoyed. She truly hated how Pansy would try and get them interested in her latest gossip, especially since it always seemed to work. Well, I thought you two would have been the first to hear, especially as you're so interested in Potter. Pansy, Daphne said irritably, pinching the bridge of her nose. Either spill it, or shut the hell up. Daphne was far less tolerant of Pansy's little games than Tracy was. Potter was seen kissing a Ravenclaw girl after lunch. Pansy shrieked with delight. Samantha Edwards told me that it was that loony girl. Said they looked like long-lost lovers. Tracy looked to Daphne, who gave her a sympathetic look. Here I was thinking Potter had a bit of taste, as he was at least talking with Slytherins, even if it was the two of you. But he was talking to Granger, and headed off with her after dinner. And kissing that Lovegood girl? I mean, really? Pansy shrugged, heading into the bathroom to prepare for bed. He's only been here a day and he's got a girlfriend already? Tracy asked Daphne in a hissed whisper. Daphne could only shrug. Maybe she's making it up. She's not. Millicent said gruffly. I didn't tell her, but I saw it myself. What? Tracy looked as if she'd been slapped. She'd been talking to Daphne about Harry all day. Daphne knew that her friend had developed a crush on the boy. She could understand why, too. He was very well spoken, and quite a bit smarter than many of the dunderheads who they shared classes with. If Tracy hadn't been so taken with the boy, Daphne thought that maybe she might fall for Harry in time. He was heading up the stairs when that girl stopped him, and then she just threw herself at him. Then she just left him there, gawking. Millicent said, eyeing the bathroom door to make sure Pansy didn't come back. Pansy was very possessive of her friend, and always made Millie feel bad for even talking to anyone else. Tracy and Daphne often thought that if Millie had a bit more courage, Pansy might find herself without friends at all. Do you think they're together? Tracy asked trepidatiously. Millicent shrugged and gathered her pajamas and headed into the bathroom as well. I can't believe this. Tracy said bitterly. Oh, come off it. Daphne scowled. Do you honestly think you can be the only girl in his life? Especially after only 1 or 2 days. Don't be so stupid. You've had exactly 1 conversation with him. He's probably going to date a few girls while he's here. The thing to do is to be a friend and let him see how amazing you are. Never talk ill of any girl he dates, or he'll just think you're a jealous bent. Like I told you, be yourself around him and he'll wise up. Besides, after you get to know him, you might find that he's not the boy for you after all. Tracy nodded and sighed. You're right. Of course you're right. You always are. I'm getting ahead of myself. He's perfectly free to snog anyone he wants. We're not even friends yet, and I'm already planning our wedding. This isn't me. Okay. Tracy gave a great sigh and slipped under her blankets as Daphne did the same. So what should I do next, oh very wise one? Tracy asked, looking over to her friend who was extinguishing her bedside lamp. How am I supposed to know? Daphne chuckled lightly. Like I have a boyfriend. Tracy snarled and chucked her pillow at her best friend, making her laugh harder. Please like and subscribe.